On November 18th, Axios published the first report about the existence of the so-called Trump plan to end the war in Ukraine. The very next day, three major outlets, Reuters, the Financial Times, and The Economist, citing anonymous sources, revealed the first details of this document. So it contains 28 points, and almost every one of them needed revision, and sometimes even contained internal contradictions. And throughout this month, work on the peace plan did not stop for a single day. What did the parties demand, and did this document actually become a real basis for ending the war? Let's figure it out. Already on the evening of November 19th, an American delegation led by U.S. Secretary of the Army Dan Driscoll arrived in Kyiv. The meeting with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, was held behind closed doors, and there are few details about it. As the American side later stated, this visit was aimed solely at finding solutions acceptable to both Kyiv and Washington. However, the press reported that the White House is very eager for all parties to sign this plan by Thanksgiving, November 27th. And this is essentially the deadline for resolving the contentious issues. At the same time, a number of European politicians are making their first statements that, in its original form, this document is unacceptable for Ukraine and the EU, and that, first and foremost, the points regarding territorial concessions, significant reduction of the Ukrainian army, and amnesty for war crimes must be revised. Negotiations must continue, and Europe should take an active part in them.
I carefully reviewed this document and immediately called U.S. President Donald Trump. I said that we could agree with some points of this peace plan, but with others, absolutely not. I said that we are fully on Ukraine's side, and the sovereignty of this country cannot be put at risk under any circumstances. After all, Europe has also been suffering from this terrible war for 4 years now. We are seeing attacks on our infrastructure, on our cybersecurity system. So this is a serious threat to the entire world order on the European continent. Friedrich Merz, Chancellor of Germany, in an interview with Deutsche Welle.
However, the American side has always emphasized that the document is a framework and will definitely be refined. The negotiations that began in Geneva and then continued in Florida clearly confirm this. The delegations of the United States and Ukraine stated that there has been significant progress and that both sides are striving not just for a ceasefire, but for a long-term peace. As a result of these meetings, it became known that there were no more deadlines for Kyiv, and the revised draft of the peace plan was reduced from 28 points to 20. As Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated, and I quote, "Frankly, positions that are not pro-Ukrainian no longer appear in it." The Ukrainian side also emphasized that any peace plan is impossible if it's based on appeasing the aggressor, because that will only bring more wars and cruelty to both Ukraine and all of Europe. We are at war in the United States, you know?
We are in a state of war, and the United States, are the decision makers who can really stop Putin, and I am counting on that. But I am really counting on pressure from the United States. And right now, the United States is acting as a mediator. That's true. That's true. They are acting as mediators between us. But I would really like them to take more steps to put pressure on Russia, because I think that Putin doesn't want to end this war. But he will be able to do it if the United States applies more pressure.
The 5-hour negotiations between the U.S. President's Special Representative Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner with the Kremlin dictator on December 2nd did not yield any public results. No compromise solution was found with the Russian side, and the Russian representative showed no interest in signing a peace agreement. By the way, this meeting started 3 hours later than scheduled. Putin really wanted to show the American representatives that he supposedly had more important things to do. And it's worth noting here that Ukraine has always supported any peace initiatives and was ready for negotiations on terms that take its national interests into account. As for the Kremlin, they offered nothing but blackmail and threats.
The Kremlin has repeatedly stated its unwillingness to agree to any meaningful security guarantees for Ukraine, likely to allow Russia to resume its aggression against Ukraine after a peace deal in order to achieve Putin's ultimate military goal, gaining full, effective control over Ukraine. In contrast, Zelensky has demonstrated Ukraine's willingness to make significant compromises. Kremlin officials have repeatedly rejected individual elements of the 28-point plan, casting doubt on Putin's willingness to accept even this preliminary agreement. from a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
On December 8th in London, Volodymyr Zelensky met with the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. The parties once again affirmed that any talks about peace should not start with demands on Ukraine, but with pressure on Russia, which continues its terror and violence. By December 14th, Berlin had become the center of diplomatic efforts to end the war. This time, representatives from the White House, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, also joined the negotiations. It was right after this round that U.S. President Donald Trump wrote that peace is closer than ever to ending this terrible war. Most importantly, Ukraine, the EU, and the United States agreed on a clear sequence for all positions. In addition, Washington and Brussels pledged to provide Kyiv with reliable security guarantees that should protect the country for many decades to come.
The multi-level approach and the U.S. commitment to security guarantees inspired optimism in Ukraine and Europe that the peace plan could potentially become a reliable deterrent against future Russian aggression. American officials described these guarantees as similar to NATO's mutual defense commitment under Article 5. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is counting on Washington to make a decision to make them legally binding through a vote in Congress. From a Bloomberg agency publication.
According to Bloomberg, citing its sources, one of the main security guarantees named by the parties is increasing the size of the Ukrainian armed forces to 800,000 personnel in peacetime. European countries may participate in the protection of air and maritime space, while the main role of control and deterrence is assigned to the United States. It is specifically emphasized that it is the United States that will help identify provocations and false flag operations in order to prevent escalation and avoid a resumption of the war.
The American president stated that he wants the United States to be part of the security guarantees for Ukraine. And right now, discussions are ongoing about what exactly this will mean and how this collective package of security guarantees will work. This raises a practical question for us. If a peace agreement is reached with Ukraine, whether it's a ceasefire or a full-fledged peace deal, how can we prevent the Russians from attacking Ukraine again? How can we prevent a repeat of what happened after the Minsk agreements of 2014 to 2015? This is exactly where security guarantees come into play. Putin must know that after a peace agreement, if he tries to attack Ukraine again, the response will be devastating. And that's exactly how we're developing these security guarantees.
The Kremlin claims that they have not seen the updated peace plan and are now preparing to resume contacts with the U.S. to understand how much it has changed. At the same time, the idea of a Christmas truce was almost immediately rejected in Moscow. Moreover, at the latest meeting of the Defense Ministry Board, Putin once again stated that Russia will not abandon its goals of seizing territories and will achieve them, I quote, by diplomatic or military means. At the same time, the dictator insulted European politicians and accused them of allegedly artificially fueling hysteria. And during the final press conference, he once again threatened the world with nuclear weapons and stated, I quote, there will be no new special military operations if we are treated with respect. All these statements, in essence, are yet another confirmation that Moscow is not seeking genuine peace, but is using diplomacy merely as a tool of pressure and a way to buy time.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.